The moment my mother tapped her glass and stood up at my son's high school graduation dinner, I should have known something was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. With a self-satisfied smile, she announced, "We've decided that Alex's college fund will be going to his cousin Ryan instead. He needs it more." Silence crashed over the table. My husband, David, tensed beside me, his grip tightening around his fork. My son, Alex, sat frozen, his face draining of color. My daughter glanced between us, confusion and hurt flickering in her young eyes. And my father? He simply nodded along, as if this betrayal was the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's what's best for the family," he added, as if they had any right to make that decision. Ryan, my nephew, my brother's son, the same nephew my parents had always favored, the one who had never worked a day in his life while Alex had spent years juggling AP courses, part-time jobs, and extracurriculars, the one who had been bailed out of every mistake, every bad decision, every consequence, by them. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, rage bubbling up from years of being cast aside, of watching my parents treat my children like afterthoughts while placing Ryan on a pedestal. But before I could even speak, David leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his beer, and let out a low, amused chuckle. "That's funny," he said, setting his glass down with deliberate ease. "Because we moved it last month." My mother blinked. My father's smug smile wavered. "What?" my mother snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. David smirked. "Yeah, we saw this coming, so we moved Alex's college fund weeks ago." And just like that, everything exploded. My mother's face turned a furious shade of red. "You had no right," she shrieked. My father slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware. "That money was meant for family," he seethed. I let out a hollow laugh. "Alex's family," I said, my voice finally finding its edge. "That fund was his. You had no say in it. You're being selfish," my mother spat. "Ryan needs this. You know how hard things have been for your brother. We are fixing things for him and you are ruining it." And just like that, everything became crystal clear. They had never planned for that money to be for Alex. Not really. It had always been waiting there for Ryan, for the moment they deemed it necessary to swoop in and take it because in their eyes, Alex had never truly mattered. I looked at my son. He sat stiffly, staring at them, not with anger, but with a quiet, gut-wrenching devastation. He had always known on some level that they didn't see him the same way they saw Ryan. But this was undeniable proof. Something inside me snapped. "Fixing things," I repeated, my voice trembling with fury. "You mean the way you fixed things last time Ryan stole from us? Or when he got arrested and you paid off the charges? Or when he wrecked my brother's car and you bought him a new one?" "That is not the same thing," my father growled. "No," I snapped, "because from where I'm sitting it looks exactly the same. You're not fixing anything. You're enabling Ryan just like you always have, and now, you're willing to steal from my son to do it." My mother's eyes flashed. "Your brother is a single father doing his best," she hissed, "and I'm a mother doing my best," I shot back. "And you just told my son, on one of the most important days of his life, that his future doesn't matter." My mother opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "We invited you here to celebrate Alex, to celebrate his hard work, his future, his success. And instead you made it about Ryan. Like always." I turned to Alex, my heart breaking at the way he stared down at his plate, trying to disappear. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice softening. "You deserved better than this." He swallowed hard and nodded. David set his napkin down and stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "We're done here," he announced. "Come on, kids." As I reached for my purse, my mother grabbed my wrist. "If you walk away from this table," she hissed, "don't expect us to be there when you need us." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "We've never been able to expect that." With that, I pulled my hand free and turned my back on them. As we walked out of the restaurant, Alex exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Thank you," he murmured. I looked at him, at my son, who had earned his future, who deserved every opportunity that he had worked so hard for, and I squeezed his shoulder. Always. The moment my mother scoffed and dismissed Alex's future as something he could just take out loans for, I knew there was no coming back from this. It was as if every ounce of pretense had been stripped away, exposing exactly who they were. Alex pushed his chair back so forcefully that it scraped against the floor, his voice trembling but firm. "I don't need anything from you," he said, I don't need your money, and I definitely don't need you in my life. David stood beside him, his grip firm on our son's shoulder. Let's go, he said, calm but unwavering. We don't owe them another second of our time. I rose as well, meeting my parents' furious stares with a final, unshakable truth. This was your last chance. You have shown again and again who you are. But today you made sure we'll never forget it. And with that, we walked out. Their shouts followed us, accusing us of being ungrateful, of tearing the family apart. But as I looked at Alex, head held high, jaw set in quiet determination despite the hurt in his eyes, I knew without a doubt that we had done the right thing. What I didn't know was just how far my parents would go to try to take that money back. At first it was just voicemails, endless angry messages from my mother, shrieking about betrayal. My father's calls were gruff, filled with thinly veiled threats. You'll regret this, he warned, as if we had done something unforgivable. Then my brother chimed in, sending a single text 2 days later. I don't know what's going on, but Ryan needs that money more than Alex does. You're being selfish, no questions, no attempt to understand, just a declaration that, once again, his son's needs outweighed mine. I didn't reply. Then the real trouble started. A week after the dinner, David got a call from the bank. I was in the kitchen when I heard him say, "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" My stomach plummeted. I barely breathed as he spoke for another minute, his face growing tight with fury. When he hung up, he turned to me, eyes dark with anger. They tried to access Alex's fund. My fingers clenched around the counter. Who? Your parents, he said, his voice taut. They called the bank pretending to be us, claimed we'd given permission for a family emergency withdrawal. The rage that surged through me was blinding. I grabbed my phone without hesitation, scrolling to my father's number. The second he picked up, I let loose. You actually tried to steal from us? My voice shook, but it was pure fury. What is wrong with you? He didn't even sound guilty. You left us no choice, he said coldly. We wouldn't have had to do that if you weren't being so unreasonable. I nearly threw my phone. Unreasonable? You tried to commit fraud? It's our money, my father snapped. My breath hitched. Excuse me? We contributed to that fund, my mother's voice cut in, sharp and indignant. I laughed, a bitter disbelieving sound. You never put a single cent into Alex's fund. You're remembering wrong, my father said smoothly. And if we were to bring this to court, I guarantee they'd agree that we have a right to it. The blood in my veins ran cold. David saw the shift in my expression and stepped closer. They wouldn't, he said, his voice firm. They don't have a leg to stand on. But I wasn't so sure. My parents were liars. Bold, manipulative liars. And if they were willing to go this far, what else were they planning? 3 days later, we got our answer. I was pulling into the driveway when I spotted the thick envelope sitting on our doorstep. My breath caught the second I saw the return address. A law firm. I ran inside, heart pounding, and tore it open. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, bile rising in my throat. They were suing us. A formal legal petition demanding that Alex's college fund be reallocated to Ryan's urgent educational needs. Their argument? That they had made verbal commitments to the fund, had a financial stake in it, and that Alex didn't need it as much as Ryan did. I sank onto the couch, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. They're actually doing it, I whispered. David read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. They're delusional. I let out a shuddering breath, hands clenching the papers. They thought they could bully us into submission. They thought they could steal from Alex and get away with it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. Patricia, I said, voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest, I need you to tear this lawsuit apart. I would fight, not just for Alex, but for every time my parents had dismissed me, manipulated me, and treated my family as disposable. They had started this war, but I was about to end it. The lawsuit was just the beginning. As I stood in the living room, gripping the thick stack of papers, my hands trembled too hard to hold them steady. They're suing us, I whispered, my voice hollow with disbelief. David looked up sharply. What? I swallowed hard, scanning the legal jargon. They're claiming they co-funded Alex's college savings, and that we illegally transferred the money without their consent. They're saying they own part of it. David shot up from his chair so fast it scraped against the floor. He snatched the papers from my hands, eyes narrowing as he read. This is complete bullshit, he muttered. But I wasn't so sure. My parents were master manipulators. They twisted reality until they painted themselves as the victims. And what terrified me most? In a legal battle, they might actually win. The proof they had over the next few days, we scrambled to gather every piece of documentation, bank statements, transfer records, deposit receipts. We had to prove that not a single cent of that fund had ever belonged to my parents. And then, just when I thought we were prepared, my parents dropped their bombshell. At the next lawyer meeting, they smugly slid a document across the table, a single deposit receipt from over a decade ago, $2,000, a contribution they had made when Alex was a baby. Their lawyer smiled as he stated their case, that because they had contributed something, they had a right to contest where the money went. I almost laughed. $2,000? My voice wavered between shock and fury. You think that gives you control over the entire fund? My mother gave me a sickly sweet smile. It was a contribution, she said. And without it, you wouldn't have had the foundation to save as much as you did. I saw red. David thankfully stayed calmer. Let me get this straight, he said, voice measured but sharp. You think that just because you gave a one-time gift over a decade ago, you now get to decide who gets the money? My father nodded smugly. Exactly. I could have screamed. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks, but the court eventually ruled in our favor. My parents had no control over Alex's fund. However, there was one catch. They were entitled to have their $2,000 returned with interest. It was a small price to pay for keeping our son's future intact. But the message was clear. My parents weren't just angry, they were out to punish us for saying no, and they weren't done yet. The next attack, barely 2 weeks after the court ruling, David walked into the house, his face pale. They reported us, he said. I blinked. What? To the IRS. The words sent ice through my veins. They're claiming we committed tax fraud, he continued grimly, that we've been hiding money and misreporting funds for years. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. This is insane. David nodded. Yeah, and now we're under investigation. The breaking point, I thought the lawsuit was the worst of it. I thought losing a chunk of money to my greedy, self-righteous parents was as bad as it could get. I was wrong. Because when the IRS showed up at our doorstep, that was when I realized this wasn't just about money. This was war. The investigation began with a letter. A cold, formal notice stating that our finances were under review due to a report of suspected tax discrepancies. David exhaled sharply and handed it to me without a word. I scanned the page, my hands trembling. This can't be real, I whispered. Oh, it's real, David muttered darkly. Then came the phone call. A polite but firm IRS agent explained that an anonymous tip had flagged us for hidden assets and fraudulent fund transfers. We knew exactly who was behind it, but proving it? That was another battle entirely. For weeks we were buried under an avalanche of audits and questions. Every account we had was scrutinized. Every deposit, every expense, every dollar had to be accounted for. It was humiliating, exhausting. And my parents? They sat back and watched, probably thinking we'd break under the pressure, fighting back, but they underestimated us. While the IRS investigation dragged on, David and I built our own case. We documented everything, the lawsuit, the fraudulent bank withdrawal attempt, every voicemail and text where my parents had outright admitted their intentions. Then we did what my parents never expected. We counterattacked. With our lawyer's help, we filed a defamation suit and a formal complaint for false reporting to the IRS. Turns out, knowingly filing a fraudulent tax report against someone? That's a crime. Suddenly, my parents weren't just facing a bitter family feud, they were facing legal consequences. When the dust settled, the IRS cleared us completely. No penalties, no hidden discrepancies, just wasted time and stress. My parents, on the other hand, they weren't so lucky. The defamation case wrecked them financially. Legal fees piled up. The stress of their IRS fraud backfired, putting their own finances under scrutiny. And that $2,000 they had so desperately fought to get back? It barely covered the cost of their own lawyers. The final goodbye, when it was all over, I blocked them. Every number, every email, every possible way they could ever contact us again. My brother sent one last message. You didn't have to do this. I didn't reply. Because yes, I did have to do this. I had to protect my family. And if my parents had to be destroyed in the process, they had no one to blame but themselves. For weeks, we were buried under mountains of paperwork, scrambling to pull together every tax record, bank, statement, and financial document that might clear our names. Our finances were spotless, but that didn't make the IRS investigation any easier. The worst part? It froze Alex's financial aid. His college flagged his account due to the ongoing review, placing a hold on his scholarship disbursements. My parents hadn't just tried to steal his college fund, they had nearly stolen his future. That was my breaking point. If they wanted a war, I was ready to end it. The first strike, I knew my parents had secrets. I had grown up watching them twist the truth, manipulate people, and cover their tracks just enough to avoid consequences. If they wanted to play dirty, so could I. It didn't take long to find what I needed. For years, my parents had paraded around as the financial backbone of the family, the responsible ones who always knew best. But what they didn't realize was that David had helped them set up their rental property investments years ago. He had handled the paperwork, the tax filings, everything. And, as it turned out, they had been underreporting rental income for 15 years. They had committed real tax fraud while accusing us of it. I picked up the phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, her tone smug. "Oh, so you're finally ready to apologize?" I nearly laughed. "No. I'm calling to let you know that I found the real tax fraud in this family." Silence. Then, a scoff. "What are you talking about?" "Your rental income. You know, the money you forgot to report to the IRS for the last 15 years? Her breath hitched. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said coolly, "and soon, so will the IRS. That is, unless you drop this ridiculous lawsuit and tell them to back off." The shift in her tone was instant. "You wouldn't." I smiled. "Try me." She hung up without another word. 2 days later, the IRS called. Our case? No longer a priority. A week after that, Alex's college funds were unfrozen. They had backed off. For now. But I knew them. I knew they wouldn't really let it end like this. I was right. The home intrusion had happened late at night. David and I were asleep when the crash of breaking glass jolted us awake. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Inside our house. David was already moving. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept next to the bed and motioned for me to call 911. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. Then a voice. "Mom? Dad?" My heart nearly stopped. "Alex." He had heard the noise. Instead of staying put, he was coming downstairs. "Stay in your room," David shouted. Too late. We stepped into the hallway just as Alex reached the stairs. And that's when we saw him. Ryan, drunk, wild-eyed, and holding a crowbar. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Ryan took a shaky step forward, his voice slurred and broken. "Where is it?" David tightened his grip on the bat. "Where's what?" Ryan's eyes burned with desperate fury. "The money." His voice cracked. "I deserve it. They promised it to me." And just like that, it clicked. My parents had sent him. They had lost legally. They knew they couldn't touch the money. So they had sent their precious grandson to do their dirty work. Ryan staggered toward us, his grip tightening on the crowbar. "You think you can just take what's mine?" Alex stepped forward before we could stop him, his fists clenched, his stance solid. "It was never yours." His voice was steady despite the fear in his eyes. Ryan snapped. He lunged. David moved fast, swinging the bat with practiced precision. The sound of wood connecting with metal rang through the house as the crowbar clattered to the floor. Ryan stumbled back, swearing, but David was already between him and Alex. "You need to leave, now." David's voice was deadly calm. Ryan's face twisted in rage, but he must have realized he was outmatched. He turned and bolted out the door, disappearing into the night. The police arrived minutes later. We pressed charges. My parents tried to plead for Ryan, tried to convince us to drop the charges. We refused. They had set this in motion. They had tried to take our son's future, destroy our lives, and when that failed, they had resorted to breaking into our home. Ryan was arrested for attempted burglary and assault. The judge wasn't sympathetic. He got probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory rehab. And my parents? Their rental tax fraud was formally reported. The IRS opened an audit, and soon they were drowning in their own legal battles. Their accounts were frozen, their properties seized, and their perfect little reputation destroyed. They had spent so much time trying to tear us down, only to be undone by their own greed. I never spoke to them again. Alex went to college, fully funded. He flourished. David and I moved on, our family stronger than ever. And my parents? Well, they learned the hard way: when you play dirty, you eventually lose everything. I took a slow breath, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with the weight of years of betrayal crashing down all at once. What kind of sister am I? The words echoed in my head, twisting into something sharper, something final. I met my father's cold stare, then my mother's guilt-ridden eyes, and finally, Ryan's broken, desperate expression. You lied to him, I said, my voice eerily calm. You manipulated him into thinking he was entitled to my son's future. And then, when we refused to let you steal from us, you sent him to break into our home. With a weapon. I turned to my brother, who had been silent, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. And you? You let them do it. You sat back and let them turn your son into this. Ryan flinched. But my parents? They didn't even deny it. My father had the audacity to look offended. We did what we had to do, he said. Family looks out for family. You should have helped your brother instead of hoarding everything for yourself. David let out a bitter laugh. Hoarding? You mean providing for our kids? Raising them without expecting handouts? Earning what we have instead of stealing it? He shook his head, disgusted. You people are unbelievable. My mother sat forward, eyes blazing. We are the ones who raised you. We sacrificed for you. And when we needed help, you abandoned us. I felt something inside me break apart, not with pain, but with clarity. All these years I had excused them, endured their favoritism, ignored the way they overlooked Alex and my daughter. I had let them take and take, convincing myself that deep down they still loved me, that somewhere inside them they saw me as their daughter, not just a convenient source of financial support. But now I saw the truth. They had never respected me, never valued me, and when I stopped letting them take from me, they had turned against me. I stood grabbing my purse. We're done here. David followed without hesitation. My brother looked up, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Wait, just wait. I turned back to him. You had years to stand up for me, for Alex. You had years to tell them this wasn't okay, and you didn't. So now you can deal with them on your own. Ryan stared at me, his jaw clenched like he wanted to fight back, but there was nothing left to say. He knew. He knew they had lied to him, used him. He had been nothing more than their pawn, just like I had been for years. My mother stood, her voice sharp with desperation. You'll regret this. I smiled. No, Mom, you will. And with that, I walked out of their house, out of their lives, and I never looked back. The final blow, the retaliation, came fast. My parents, true to form, tried to take revenge. They spread rumors through extended family about how I had turned against them, how I had stolen from Ryan, how I had abandoned my family. I ignored them. Then, they tried to take legal action again, digging up old financial records, hoping to find a way to claw back Alex's college fund. They failed. And then the last desperate move. They tried to claim grandparents' rights, a legal attempt to gain visitation with my kids, a final attempt at control. We shut that down so fast their heads spun. The judge took one look at the restraining order we had filed after Ryan's break-in, the fraudulent lawsuit they had already lost, and the documented evidence of their manipulation and deceit, and dismissed them on the spot. That was the last time I heard from them. The aftermath, Alex went to college, fully funded. He thrived, free from the weight of their expectations and favoritism. Ryan? I don't know. I never looked back. My brother? He tried once or twice to reach out. I never answered. And my parents? They lost everything. The IRS audit I had hinted at? I followed through. Their years of underreporting rental income caught up to them. Fines, back taxes, and penalties piled up. Their financial empire, built on lies and manipulation, crumbled. And me? I won. Not just in court. Not just in money. I won peace. I won the right to raise my kids in a home without lies, without favoritism, without betrayal lurking behind every family gathering. And I never, ever regretted walking away. I stepped forward, my hands trembling with years of unspoken fury, my voice sharp as a blade. What kind of parents are you? I hissed, my gaze burning into them. You had 2 children, but you spent my entire life treating me like I was nothing while he, I pointed at my brother, watching as he shrank under my glare, was handed everything. And now you expect me to sacrifice my son's future because of your guilt? My mother stood abruptly, her face twisted with indignation. We did what we had to do. No, I spat, my voice low and cutting. You did what you always do. You chose him over me. And this time, you got caught. The silence that followed was suffocating. I saw it then, the cracks in their perfect illusion. The way their confidence wavered now that the truth was no longer hidden behind whispers and excuses. Then Ryan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You lied to me? His eyes, wide with disbelief, locked onto our mother as if seeing her for the first time. Ryan, sweetheart, she reached for him, but he stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No, you promised me, he choked out, his breath coming in sharp, broken gasps. You swore I wouldn't have to worry about college, that I was set. He turned to our father. And you knew. Dad's silence was answer enough. Ryan let out a hollow laugh, one that echoed with the weight of betrayal. Then, slowly, he turned to me. I'm sorry. And for the first time in my life, I saw it. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but understanding. Regret. The realization that he had been used, just as much as I had been discarded. He turned and walked out without another word. I didn't stop him. My parents, they ranted, they raved, they demanded that I fix this, that I was the one tearing the family apart. I simply met their eyes and said, "We're done."